In March 2025, Donald Trump signed a trade action that could reshape or dismantle America's most iconic industry. The move was framed as a way to bring back jobs and reclaim manufacturing. But beneath the surface, it triggered something else entirely. This is the story of what's really happening. Not the headlines, not the spin, the version CEOs whisper behind closed doors but won't say out loud. On the surface, it's about tariffs. A 25% tax on imported vehicles and parts from Mexico and Canada. A 10% tariff on all Chinese imports, including electric vehicle batteries and components. But behind those numbers is a slow, strategic unraveling of the supply chains that power American manufacturing, and Ford is directly in the blast zone. This isn't just trade policy, it's economic surgery with a chainsaw. In this video, we break down why Ford is warning of billions in losses, how these tariffs could add $2,000 to $5,000 to the cost of every new car, how layoffs are already happening, quietly, town by town, and how China, Germany, and South Korea are preparing to seize the global EV market while America stalls itself. This video is part of an ongoing series that traces the invisible forces behind America's economic shifts, the patterns hidden in trade deals, supply chains, industry closures, and quiet political power moves. We're not here to tell you what to think. We're here to show you what they're hoping you won't notice. If you want to understand the next disruption before it hits your wallet, your job, or your city, you're in the right place. You're not watching the news version. No, you're watching the version CEOs talk about behind closed doors, and most people never hear. That puts you in a different category already, so stay with it. It didn't start with headlines, it started with hesitation, a supplier delay, a missing shipment, a sudden spike in parts costs that nobody budgeted for. In factories across America, especially in the Midwest, managers started whispering, something's shifting. And then came the announcement. On March 26, 2025, President Donald Trump invoked Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, triggering what's now known as the tariff shock, a 25% blanket tariff on all imported vehicles and parts from Mexico and Canada, and a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, including EV components, electronics, and batteries. The rationale? Well, national security and American jobs. The effect? A chain reaction inside the most tightly wound supply in the world, the North American auto industry. Ford wasn't just impacted, it was hit dead center. According to internal estimates and industry data, nearly 60% of parts used in a US-built Ford vehicle come from either Mexico or Canada. That includes Mexican-made transmissions for the Ford Bronco, Canadian steel and aluminum for the F-150, America's top-selling truck, wiring harnesses, sensors, and brake systems that cross borders 7 or more times before a vehicle is ever built. Disrupt one link, and the whole chain seizes. And when it did, prices started whispering back. Analysts at Goldman Sachs projected that just the tariff on parts alone would add $2,000 to $4,000 to the price of an average car. Internal models show that Ford would either have to absorb billions in losses or pass the cost to, consumers. Either way, the math breaks. A Ford Edge that once retailed for $38,000, suddenly edging past $42,000. A Mustang Mach-E creeping dangerously close to $60,000. And beneath the pricing panic, layoffs began quietly. Not at Ford directly at first, but at suppliers in places like Romulus, Michigan, and El Paso, Texas, and Arroyo, Mexico. No headlines, no protests, just a slow exhale of jobs. That's how collapse begins, not with a bang, but with silence. The phrase "built in America" hits hard. It evokes pride, power, self-reliance. But here's the truth that almost no one says out loud. There is no such thing as a 100% American car. Not Ford, not Chevy, not even Tesla. Every vehicle on the lot is a jigsaw puzzle of global collaboration, stitched together across hundreds of supply lines, trade agreements, and foreign labor forces. When Trump says, "just make it here," it's like telling someone to rebuild a skyscraper without using steel, concrete, or windows. It sounds patriotic, I guess, until of course, you do the math. Let's do it. The average modern car contains over 30,000 individual parts. Many are sourced from over 40 countries. Even vehicles assembled in the US are still composed of 40 to 60% foreign parts, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And it's not just parts, it's precision. Some transmissions can only be made at 2 facilities in the world. One is in Japan, the other is in Mexico. Some sensors are produced exclusively in Germany or Taiwan. Batteries? Over 60% of the world's EV batteries come from China. The system was never about independence, it was about efficiency. Margins are razor thin. One missing part, one delayed shipment, and you don't get a car, you get a $40,000 paperweight. That's why Ford, GM, and Stellantis don't just import parts, they depend on them. And here's the trap. The tariffs don't rebuild American factories overnight, they just raise the cost of doing business today without solving the problems of tomorrow. What Trump called leverage, the industry calls a loaded gun aimed at its own foot. Because you can't tariff your way to control when your ecosystem was built on trust, speed, and collaboration. And once you break that, once your suppliers start looking elsewhere, once foreign competitors start filling the vacuum, you don't get it back. Not in months, not in years, sometimes never. You don't need a press release to tell you something's wrong. You'll feel it in your next car payment, in a dealership lot that's suddenly half empty, or in the look your neighbor gives you after getting laid off from the plant down the road. It's already happening. Ford has warned of billions in losses if tariffs persist. Stellantis laid off 900 U.S. workers last week after idling Canadian and Mexican plants. Jaguar Land Rover and Audi are pausing U.S. exports altogether. But these are just the first dominoes. Analysts at CNBC estimate that the industry could lose over $100 billion in the next year alone. Vehicle prices climbing fast. A Ford Explorer that cost $44,000 now pushes past $48,000. And while that's, painful, it's not the worst part. The real damage is happening in towns that don't trend on Twitter. In Ohio, where Ford just opened an EV battery plant that now sits half-stocked. In Kentucky, where suppliers are being squeezed out by foreign automakers with no tariffs to dodge. In Michigan, where workers are being forced into shorter shifts as inventory stalls. The media calls it market adjustments. But to the families living through it, it's just Monday. Here's the terrifying part. While America hesitates, China isn't slowing down. BYD, a Chinese EV giant, outsold Tesla globally last year. And guess what? Their batteries, materials, and supply chains are running full steam, untouched by these tariffs. We're not just risking economic pain, we're risking permanent disadvantage in the next industrial revolution. Not because we're not capable, but because we're busy punching ourselves in the face and calling it strategy. If this is starting to feel bigger than the headlines made it seem, well, it's because it is. Most people won't piece this together until it's already over, but if you're still here, you're not most people. Thank goodness. Keep going. The next part will make everything click. Trust economies don't collapse overnight. They erode quietly, piece by piece, until one day the power is just, somewhere else. That's the risk we're looking at now. Because while tariffs might seem like a short-term political tool, their consequences unfold like a long-term chess match. And right now, America's falling a few moves behind. Consider this. In 2024, the US still held a competitive edge in EV innovation, battery tech, charging infrastructure, consumer trust. Ford, GM, and even startups like Rivian were catching up to Tesla, while China's BYD surged ahead overseas. But today, Ford's multi-billion-dollar EV projects in Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, and Tennessee are in limbo. Why? Because they were built assuming cross-border trade would stay stable, and that key materials like nickel, lithium, semiconductors would keep flowing from allies like Canada and logistical hubs like Mexico. The new tariffs didn't just hike costs, they shook the foundation these investments were built on. If those plants stall, if consumer demand dips from price hikes, if subsidies vanish in policy chaos, the US doesn't just slow down, it yields the field. And here's where it gets darker. Other nations are watching. Germany is doubling down on EV supply chain independence. South Korea just locked a lithium deal in Argentina. China controls over 75% of global battery material processing. They're not reacting to our tariffs, they're exploiting them. Meanwhile, foreign automakers, Hyundai, Toyota, BMW, still enjoy no tariffs from their own governments and are quietly gaining US market share while Detroit bleeds. Trump's team claims this is a necessary reset, a shock to the system to bring manufacturing home. But history shows that when industries fracture, they don't always return. Ask the textile towns, the steel mills, the camera factories. Power doesn't wave goodbye, it just moves on. And when it's gone, you usually notice too late. People think history happens in big moments, but most of it happens in silence when no one's paying attention. A 25% tariff isn't a war, it's not a recession. It doesn't come with a siren. It just makes one part a little more expensive, then another. Then a shift gets cut, a plant slows down, A decision is made in a boardroom to move production to Brazil or Vietnam. And by the time anyone notices, the damage isn't breaking news, it's just the new normal. Ford knows this. That's why Farley walked into Washington without a camera crew. He wasn't making a political statement, he was trying to stop a slow bleed that almost no one can see. Because the real risk isn't just job losses or rising car prices. The real risk is that we forget how fragile the system is, that we stop asking questions, that we let slogans replace strategy. This industry isn't built on flags, it's built on flow, timing, access, trust. Break that, and what looks like patriotism can quietly turn into paralysis. Think about this. When was the last time you heard about a factory opening in your town? Now think about how many you've heard closing. It's not a political talking point, it's the drift of an economy that's misreading its own pulse. Right now, it feels like the system is holding together, but if you look close, the bolts are loosening, the seams are stretching, the silence is growing. Automakers are adjusting their marketing. Ford launched a campaign from America for America, offering employee-level pricing not to celebrate independence but to soften the blow. Stellantis is doing the same. Hyundai is buying time. BMW is watching, knowing their factories aren't under threat. And quietly, slowly, foreign companies are positioning to eat America's market share, while the US government forces its own into a chokehold. This isn't just economics, it's leverage. Once lost, it's almost impossible to get back. The US gave up textile dominance, gave up semiconductor manufacturing, gave up camera tech. In every case, it started with a delay, a cost, a shortcut. Then the knowledge left, then the machines, then the jobs. This is how a superpower loses, not with a bang, but with 1,000 quiet exits. And maybe years from now when someone says, "Remember when cars were cheaper? Or didn't that plant used to be open?" You'll remember watching this because you were paying attention when it mattered. Most people won't. They'll keep, scrolling, keep driving, keep thinking someone else is in charge. But someone is always paying the price, and eventually it's everyone. This wasn't a documentary. This wasn't a conspiracy theory. This was the blueprint they hoped you'd never connect. And now that you've seen it, you're different. You're not scrolling past headlines anymore. You're not buying the Made in America label without asking what part was made. You're not going to look at a $50,000 car and think that's just inflation. No, now you know where it's coming from. Now you've seen what most won't see until it's already too late. That's not entertainment. That's an edge. And if you think this ends with the auto industry, you haven't been paying attention, because the same pressure is already building in healthcare, housing, energy, and food. Quiet moves behind closed doors, and every one of them will feel normal until one day they won't. So here's the deal. You've got two choices. You can click off, forget this, and go back to the feed, just another smart person playing dumb. Or you can stay plugged in with Morrow, join the ones who always know before it breaks. No fanfare, no face, no fluff, just the truth they hope stays buried. Hit subscribe or don't. But if the next domino falls and you didn't see it coming, you'll remember this moment and what you chose to ignore. Thank you everyone for watching. If you like this video, please remember to like and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.